like to welcome everybody. My name is Don Taylor. I teach sustainability at Main Street Middle School in Montpelier, and this is the Middle Grades Collaborative Conversations. This is our fifth webinar. It's January 18th today. And today's topic is going to be about student behavior and maybe some of the things, issues, or trends that we're seeing post-pandemic. And I know that the pandemic I was just mentioning as folks came on, schools closed a year ago, I think around March 1st, 4 years ago, around March 1st. And it seems like a long time ago, but it also feels like the educational systems are still struggling with some of the aftermath. And I'm not sure what that's titled or if there's a name for it, but today we're going to be talking about some of the trends we're seeing in students and maybe even among colleagues. And then we'll start talking also about what we can do to continue on our path to an effective middle level education. Before I go any further, I'd like to introduce our collaborators, and I'm just going to throw it over to Meg O'Donnell. Meg, if you could introduce yourself and then select somebody else. And then I'll read a quote that I have, and then we'll get right into our conversation. Go ahead, Meg.
Great, thanks, Don. Hi there, my name is Meg O'Donnell. I teach 7th and 8th grade humanities at Shelburne Community School, and always enjoy being a part of this group. Kev, I'm going to send it to you.
Everybody, my name is Kevin Peely Hunt. I am a 5A generalist at Wilson Central School. I already told Don this, but I'm alone right now with my little guy. He's quiet and content, but in case I disappear, that's why. And I will send it over to Katie.
Hey folks, Katie Farber, assistant professor at St. Michael's College, she, her, hers, and work with undergraduate and graduate students. And I'll kick it over to Evie.
Hi, I'm Evie Gray. I teach, that's okay, happens all the time, Katie. I teach 8th grade English at People's Academy Middle Level in Morrisville. Super excited to be on board, and I'll send it to Christy.
Hi, everybody. Christy Beveridge, she, her pronouns. I am a program director and communications director for Up for Learning, a nonprofit based in Waterbury, Vermont.
All right, thanks everybody. And I really appreciate everybody taking the time to contribute and to join our conversation. The topic of today's discussion is how have learning communities responded to issues related to the pandemic? And as I was mentioning, it was 4 years ago, but it seems like there's been this long unwinding sort of aftermath of it. And there's some student behavior, there's collegial behavior, there's admin behavior. I can't put my finger on it. But I just get a little bit of a sense that something isn't quite back to the way it was before. And I'd like to read some quotes to start us off, and then we'll just kind of jump into the discussion. And this is from Edutopia, an article that I found, and I quote, "Almost 3 years or 4 years since the pandemic started and roughly 16 months since US schools were universally reopened for in-person learning, the country has largely settled into its post-pandemic normal. COVID-19 mitigation measures have largely vanished, and the federal government has declared that the pandemic is no longer an emergency. But it's increasingly clear that these decisions didn't suddenly end the pandemic's impacts on kids. While there's ample and largely warranted public concern about learning loss, this narrow framing underestimates the breadth and depth of the pandemic's effect on children's well-being. A real recovery will require not just intensive academic interventions, but also intentional efforts to rebuild students' social skills and their sense of belonging in their school communities. That remains the central paradox facing teachers today. Despite all the attention being paid to lost learning, schools won't actually be able to get kids back on track academically without doing more to address the pandemic's deeper social and emotional impacts. And my first question to the panel, and I'll start off with Meg again, is what are some of the trends or some of the things that you're seeing in student behavior or in performance or at your school that feel a little off or that you can connect to the pandemic and aren't quite what you remember them as in the past? Meg?
Yeah, Don, thanks for that. I think something I think about, I'm reteaching a unit that I've taught in many different iterations over the years, and I pulled out something that I did 4 years ago, 6 years ago, something like that. And I was looking at the ask of what the tasks were that were part of that unit. And I thought, my God, I will never be able, like, I can't ask that same ask of this this cohort of students. It's too much. It's too layered. It's too self-directed. And so it really, I literally, like, I felt my jaw drop, like, oh my gosh, I have to really, really mitigate and really, really redo that unit. I never teach the same unit the same way anyway, but I just thought I really can't ask these same tasks of students. And so I think that's one thing that I see is just the asks for students to be really self-directed and self-motivated is particularly tricky. I think something else, I don't know if this is in line with that same question, Don, but I think something else that I'm noticing is our capacity as, when we feel like something's not going right for a small cohort of students, we might tend, I'm talking about my team of teachers here, we might say, well, maybe we shouldn't do this anymore because it's not working for students. And then when we step back and we say, wait, it's not working for 100% of the students. And so how are we addressing, I think, Evie, we were talking about this last night, right? Like, how are we addressing what's not working for that small percentage of kids who it's not working for, right? So it's this, it's checking our assumptions and checking our reactions, right? Like, well, the whole thing can't work, so we have to throw it all. It's like, well, maybe that's not entirely true. And maybe it's just the needs of a particular smaller group of kids that we really need to zero in on and not. So I'm literally just coming out of our team meeting where we're having these conversations. And that's what I keep thinking about is we always have known that one size doesn't fit all, but we're really being asked to analyze that more specifically for our kids these days. Is what's working, what's not working, and for whom is it not working, and what do we need to do about it?
Thanks, Meg. And I'll just let you select who you'd like to hear from next.
Sure. Evie.
Yeah, I would echo parts of what Meg said. Here at school, I feel like executive functioning skills are the things that students are really struggling with right now, more so than I've seen in teaching 8th grade before. I mean, we know middle schoolers are still developing those skills and it's never perfect. But I think that like emotional control, impulse control, and like self-monitoring, right? Like being aware of where they are, or like I feel like outsized reactions to small problems, like that those things are really the trends that I'm noticing, sort of across the board. And I feel like I've got a really unique perspective because 2 years ago I taught these students as 6th graders and I was their 6th grade teacher and I moved up. So it's like, it's interesting to see them not only 2 years older, but 2 more years removed from the pandemic. And I think as a cohort, for the most part, right, excluding right that small group that Meg is sort of referencing, I think the majority of students have shown growth in like stamina and resilience, and like for students whose lives have sort of quote unquote returned to normal, like that resilience, they've been able to rebuild that resilience. For our students who are experiencing poverty or like additional challenges at home that were exacerbated by the pandemic, I feel like the stamina and resilience is another trend. And like it's to me very clear that that's one of the big impacts of the pandemic. That's part of the fallout.
So can I just ask a follow-up question before we move on? So Evie, that is interesting that you sort of had this group right after the pandemic and then you have them again. And you kind of hit on this, that some of the kids seem to have been able to build up the resilience. I guess my question is, are you surprised by when you mention things like executive functioning skills and organization, are you surprised that that hasn't caught back up or that still remains a challenge?
Not surprised necessarily. Like, I think I also had some of these students because I was teaching 5th and 6th grade for a little while there. So I've had some of these students, this is my 3rd year with them, and just knowing that like my response, like in the classroom when they were in 5th grade and then 6th grade, being on both of those teams, we weren't focusing on social emotion, or sorry, we weren't focusing on executive functioning skills necessarily. We were talking more about social emotional stuff and focusing more on like the learning loss rather than sort of the skills, because that was the priority at the time, was like really just making sure that they don't drop too far with their academics. So I'm not surprised that by 8th grade, they don't have great impulse control because we weren't, they were in groups of 6 for a year. Like it was a very different scenario that for a long time it was like 1 adult and 6 kids in a classroom, and I was able to better attend to their needs. And now that we're back into groups of 18 and 20, it's like not a surprise that they haven't developed those skills. I'll pass it off to Christy.
Thanks, Evie. Yeah, I just came from a middle school retreat actually this morning with Edmonds Middle School in Burlington. We were at the King Street Center. And just thinking about, we did sort of a protocol of like strengths and opportunities at their school, like what's working well for them, and then where would they like to see change. And I think one thing that came up was like the length of classes. And I said, well, how long are your classes? And they said, oh, like 40 minutes. And they said, it's so long. And I was like, oh, I don't think that's that long. But for them, it feels long. It feels very long. And I was chatting with one student who says she's like, often I don't go to class. I skip classes. And just, I feel like that's a trend I've seen too, like working with BHS, we were working with a team of students who are like going to school, but then not going to class. So they're like wandering around the hallways, they're sitting in the cafeteria with their friends. They just don't go to class. And I don't know if that's, the feeling of during the pandemic, they didn't have the structure. They didn't have someone saying you need to be in this chair for this long. So they just sort of got used to calling the shots on their own. And these are high schoolers, of course, that were on that BHS team, but it seemed to be ringing true with some of the middle schoolers we were talking to today. And I think one of their big concerns was lack of connection with teachers. That came up a couple times, of like not feeling like they're really connecting with their teachers. And I think that could have many, we didn't really get to the root causes of these. We were just meeting for the first time today, but that came up a lot, was just feeling disconnected from their teachers. And I'll pass it to Kevin.
Thanks. So yeah, a couple things that have definitely come up that we're seeing too, that stamina and resilience piece is massive. And again, it's like, I feel like there's such a lost sense of accountability too. And then when you try to hold somebody to that line and to something that's accountable, then the kids feel like they're being attacked. And we're noticing the same thing. It's like, we had a big school survey, and one of the things was about students and who they felt connected to, or if they felt connected to teachers or adults. And, the ones that were really saying they didn't feel like they connected to anybody were the same ones that we felt like, hey, taking more laps in the hallway, just remember our expectations. And they felt like, why am I always being the one in trouble? It's like, just the expectation, like, we want to make sure you're safe. We know where you are. Like, we're not asking for anything extra out of you. And it's like those students, and I don't know, that's been such a big shift. I feel like is like that accountability piece, and can we hold students accountable still and still make them feel like they're cared about? Because we do whatever we can to make them feel that way, and know that we love and care about them. Other things too is I'd notice our staff in behavior systems and like our direction center are tapped. Like they don't eat lunch. They don't have time. It's just like they are completely tapped across the school. And that's been such a shift from pre-pandemic to now. And I think a lot of these behavior spikes and other things I've noticed is parent responses too. When we email home, be like, hey, just so you know, like this thing happened, or this like really unexpected response to something we asked, like it's back to like, well, what did you do to cause this versus, oh, I'll follow up at home. It's like an excuse for some reason or something else. And I feel like we have more and more trends of the parent excuses and responses for their kids' behavior versus being like, all right, yeah, that was unexpected, or that was not kind or an okay thing to do. Like, we'll follow up at home. So it's like that kind of sense of entitlement that's come. And again, I'm not sure if that's because, 4 years ago, we were just like, let's not push these kids at all because they're already going through enough. And we just kind of stuck with that. So it's like that hard level to push. I know we were bringing up like executive functioning. One thing, we really value our PLP process for that reason. A lot of our PLP goals, especially around like self-direction, come into that executive functioning process and really working with kids to establish goals around it. But we've seen it on our team, which our PLP is our backbone on our team. Thank you. Sorry, we found the Tupperware. We have less and less families signing up for conferences. Like, we have to like really stay on families, and it's where it used to be like 1 or 2 families wouldn't come in. It's now like 6 or 7 families that we like really have to like call and email to try to set something up, just to get them in to connect about hearing about their kids' PLP. It's like something to celebrate. So that's been an unfortunate trend as well. I will pass it over to Katie.
Wow, so much to think about. What everybody's been saying. It makes me really reflective. I've been doing some research about those smaller cohorts and the relationships that teachers were able to build, and the pod times and the 2 teachers and the more humanity that teachers were offered and students were offered during that time, to eat in smaller settings, to teachers able to use the bathroom because there's another adult handy, able to be nimble and go outside, able to sit and read with a student who was having a tough day or whatever it was. And we just lost that. So it's like we had these personal touches, environments, relationships, and then it was just this back to normal. So of course they're feeling resistant. Of course they've lost some agency, and they've lost some depth and freedom. The teachers feel this. I've seen that, listened, I've felt it. And then I know that the students feel that. So that's really striking me. And then, I've been reading some data today about the student-teacher relationship being more important than ever for belongingness, for achievement, for engagement. And yet we're having more, not threats to those, but it's more complex. And then I think, Meg, about what you said, life has so much increased complexity. Everything is complex. And so I feel like what I see from some of my students is not able to come into stuff that is complex with as much, because the complexity, parts of the brain are already tapped out with whatever is happening at home and society. So it just feels like a special kind of storm around having to simplify, needing to be responsive, needing to reflect. I'm working with, some just teachers at night, right? They're like, they need time to reflect and process before we can do anything else together. We need to be able to care for each other's experiences and talk through what happened that day in a school with limited resources. I noticed definitely that stamina is low. And then I'm thinking about the issue of absenteeism, which we've got to, it's so much higher now, and we've got to have this like less punitive and more collaborative approach. But yet I hear, Kevin, what you're saying about like there also needing to be some accountability. So it's really, really challenging. And then I think, a student walks in late and I say, hey, I'm so glad you're here. I'm glad to see you, because come, even if you're late. But I want you to be on time. So it's that constant tension. So I think I mostly just admired the problem, but good timing, Joe. Maybe you can help us.
So, Joe, the question, just to start us out, is what are some of the trends that you're seeing in students? And I guess the aftermath is the word I've been looking for, after the pandemic. And folks, there's a whole list of different things that we've heard from, but just wondered what you're seeing and feeling as you're dealing with students in, year 4 after the pandemic, and sort of what you're noticing.
I'm noticing that I have to reset, that it's on me to try to build relationships with the young people, and then things seem to be going better. But the challenge is trying to find the points in the relationship where we can move forward productively and positively. And that takes a lot of listening and a lot of observation. And fortunately, students stay with me for a couple of years. And so I have that luxury of this is the second year with a group of young people, and I'm enjoying it. But it's because I've had that time to be able to spend with them, and they've been able to spend with me, so we get a sense of who we are and where we're trying to go. It's really hard. An analogy would be, or a metaphor or whatever, kayaking on a pond and feeling very comfortable about it, and then the wind picks up and the waves start to whitecap, and I have to do things very differently in order to be able to maintain being in the boat. And that's how these last few years have felt. And now it seems like the wind's dying down a little bit. If I am able to continue to put at the center the idea of my relationship with you is the most important thing. Your relationship with me is the most important thing. That's how we're going to figure this out together. And what's the purpose? Why are we here? Let's try to have those conversations. I've talked about that in the past. And that's where I'm coming from.
All right. Thank you. I don't know if I have too much to add, and I may have said this before, and this is happening more frequently as I get older, but I read an article in the New Yorker by Zadie Smith. It was a memoir type deal. And in the memoir, she was mentioning how folks, she said over the age of 50, I'm going to say over the age of 40, she had a line in that memoir that said, people over the age of 50 still think that the internet is separate from reality. And that hit me really, like, it just kind of, I hadn't thought about it that way, because when I talk to kids, the internet is not, it is woven into their reality, right? And so does that have a lot to do with a kid in the classroom? I'm not sure, but it has a lot to do with their ability to discern fact from fiction, their ability to experience things as they are without having to put it on Instagram or to post it. I mean, when's the last time not just we, but teachers had a discussion about all the pressure that must be on kids with the social media and the TikToking and what they're seeing, and what are we missing, because we're not trending. We're not, I don't know if you've heard this word, the Riz. Have anybody heard that, right? It's like slang, and kids are making fun of me because I don't know what it means. And I'm sitting there like, oh, I'm going to have to Google that. And I'm feeling like I'm ready for like the old folks home. And, but these are things, these are trends, these are things that they know and do and are experiencing, and they're totally off our radar. Right. And so one of the things I'm feeling is that how relevant are we and what we're doing in schools? How relevant are we to the young people's lives? And especially in a internet connected age where kids are just awash in the TikTok and the Snapchat and all the things that are present and relevant to them. And to me, it's as someone who's knows a little bit about adolescent development and how significant certain things can be in their lives, that pressure must be immense. And I worry about that. And then I think the other piece to it too is digital citizenship. If you remember before the pandemic, there was all this promise of one-to-one computing and how great this was going to be, especially in the context of personalized learning, especially in the context of choice menus and certifications and micro-credentialing and all these fabulous opportunities that we were going to build out for kids. And now when kids have an opportunity, it's very clear what the expectation is. It's very clear that I'm monitoring the behavior they're going right, it's right to games. And their ability, as Evie mentioned, to be self-directed, to be focused is a struggle. And I guess just the last thing I'll say is when Christy mentioned a student saying 40 minutes is too long, I'm thinking, man, if I could have an 80-minute period, right, that would be fantastic. But for kids, 40 minutes is an eternity. And for some reason, we've decided to, at least in some organizations I'm observing, revert to 40 minutes here, 40 minutes here, and it's a transition here and a transition there. And geez, if I decide to take that class off, who's really going to know? And so, as Joe mentioned, you have to be around kids in a really positive way to build those relationships with them. And 40 minutes does not always seem like the best way to do that. Especially when you have expectations or people, this is what I need to do, and a kid shows up late, and it's hard to be that, oh, welcome, come on in, you're 10 minutes late, and I'm gonna have to re-explain everything I did explain. And so that's a challenge that we're seeing as well. But I guess, so that's, as Katie Farber mentioned, that's admiring the problems. And I guess the next question, as middle school educators, what are we doing, or what are you seeing, or what are you trying to do to overcome those challenges? And what are some successes you're having? And what does that look like in your learning community? And I'll leave it open if somebody wants to start, and then just pass it along to the next.
I'm happy to dive in. I know we've been talking a lot as a team and just really talking about what things we can control as a team, that, there's so many things at the systems level we just can't control, or how our admin wants things done, or just how our school system works. But, we want to come back to, I guess, way back in the past, we used to do like parent potlucks and family, like more of family community things where like the families would come in, or we would have a meeting and just kind of lay out like where we're at. And not just have it be like a curriculum night, but just like who we are and fun things happening and challenges we're seeing, and just getting like the community response, and us being like, hey, this would be really helpful for us if this. And instead of like that always coming through an email, just kind of getting that face to face with families, or what is great now. And I think since the pandemic, being able to offer like a Zoom option for families who couldn't come into the building, or for whatever reason don't want to come into the building. Because I know for some of our curriculum nights that we had to do during the pandemic, when we were mostly online, like we had a great turnout because people just kind of logged in and were able to be home with the family, and like right before dinner, right after dinner. So that's one thing that we're talking about as a team, is like, all right, if we're seeing these issues, we kind of know where a lot of them are coming from. Like, let's really try to bring families together again, and just see, start at that human side of it, of let's reconnect as a group, because we all want the best for these kids. It shouldn't feel like an us versus them mentality. So we're trying to figure out how that's going to look, when it's going to happen, which is also tricky because, finding time. So pass it over to Meg.
Thanks, Kev. I think something that can't be underestimated is just that level of consistency of showing up. And I imagine that as posed challenges for schools that are dealing with absenteeism for teachers, but just trying to be as consistent as possible, like establishing routines and really being predictable with that. I noticed that offers a sense of calm, and students know what to do and know what's expected of them. And I see that play out. We're lucky that we have an hour every day, but I also know that I can't, I break it up into like 3 20-minute options or so, because I know that their stamina is not for an hour. So we really try to break that up. So I think that's one thing. And I think the other thing too is, I think I took that article that you had shared, Joe, with Don, and I shared that with our 5-8 middle school here at Shelburne. And I can't tell you how many of us were like, oh my gosh, yes, like we see this all the time. And it was reaffirming, like, oh, good, it's not just us. Like these are things that many folks are experiencing. And I think we need to advocate for our middle schoolers. Like I do notice sometimes in a pre-K-8 building that it's really easy to just kind of get frustrated with the middle schoolers because their behaviors are unexpected, and there's sometimes teachers are frustrated by that. And I think we really need to continue to advocate for that. So boy, if in anyone's research, or like Katie, as you're finding things, like anything that's like a short, sweet reminder to just share with folks, I think we crave that. We wanna be in the know. What are the national trends, and how can we take that information to each other and support one another, right? Because then that, I think that also goes a long way to building that sense of colleagueship in our buildings, right? Like if we're supporting one another and we're seeing like, hey, it's not just you, it's not just happening in French, it's happening in my class too. Like we can go a long way to reinforce and have consistent messages for our kids. And I think that matters. Let's see.
We didn't hear you, Meg.
So sorry. I got so quick to mute. I did say Joe, but anyone else who wants to go is fine.
Okay, well, we have some tools that were kind of imposed on us, but it does give us direction. It gives us some purpose. Where young people are trying to move their scores in positive ways, and we can either, I think in some other iterations I've fought against that stuff, but I find it as a pretty concrete tool for everybody to rally behind and to work together on. And so the STAR assessments and the IXL assessments that are out there that we're using are proving to be things we can discuss in common, to have some common ground to bridge that gap that we were talking about before as to why are we all here. It's not the end all be all, but it does help a little bit, and it goes beyond what grade did I get or what standard did I meet or not meet, and those discussions that break down into personality sometimes. Having a tool that is a step removed from that has proved to be helpful on occasion. The things that Meg talked about and the things that were in that article were helpful for me. There wasn't a lot that we haven't all heard about in middle grades in the past, but applying those tried and true middle grade strategies to today's environment was a nice refresher to read the article and then hear those same things that we heard back in the 80s and say, oh yeah, okay. Standing out in front of in the hallway and greeting students as they're coming in is a great idea, and being welcoming and engaging right away in them as people as opposed to numbers in a seat. Those are all things that we heard at the beginnings of our careers, and that article was a way to refresh those kind of things. So I don't know there's no magic bullet that's going to fix what's going on now, except us being true to what we know to be right and sharing that with the young people and letting them know that's why we think we're here. We think supporting you is the most important thing. We think moving you forward in life is the most important thing. You need some more skills. We're going to practice them. You need more experiences. We're going to give them to you. Let's work it out. We learned that a long time ago when we were in college. And now we have to keep doing it. Oh, I'm supposed to pass it on. Katie.
Thanks, Joe. I'm just thinking about the humanizing, right? Humanizing pedagogies. Like Joe, you're really just like making me think about all of the things we can do to connect as humans and build belongingness and community. And sometimes it's really silly. Like I'm watching Only Murders in the Building with my daughters, and the two characters, like one of them eats dip all the time. Like he actually eats no meals, but he just carries like dip around or goes to like a engagement, and gets the dip. And like everybody remembers that. Like you remember quirks about your own teachers, like these things that humanize you and make you unique. Like, what are those things in our students that we can then circle back to? And then what are we showing them? Being vulnerable, like, like I cannot bake. Like if I'm going to bring you something, it will be from Dunkin' Donuts, and that's just how it is. This is what I say to my students. It's like, it just makes me think about those ways we can be humanizing, not only like in our pedagogies, but also like in just the way we're presenting. And then the message that like you being here matters, and that if you weren't here, the school wouldn't work well, or the class wouldn't work well. So like, if you have a role, like you're leading this thing at advisory, or you're reading to a younger student, or you're involved in some service or leadership in the building, like every day, like it matters that you're here, so that they feel that and they want to come. We've got some data that supports when kids are involved in stuff like that, they come to school more, right? Somebody notices when you're not there. So just, and then I'm thinking about dopamine, like the real dopamine, right? Versus like the sort of hits that people are getting from the likes and all of that stuff. The classics, Joe, like that you're talking about, like being in nature, going for walks, like all of these things that we know create depth and more resilience in students and in adults and everybody, revisiting those and like really trying to engage in them when folks are feeling stuck, or just to live a better life. So those are some things I'm thinking about. Okay, who hasn't gone yet? My memory is there we go. There we go, Evie. Got it.
I was just thinking about a couple of things. One being like student voice and engagement, that I think, I run a student planning committee, which is like students come in voluntarily when they want, it's not like a huge commitment, but they can come in once a week, a Wednesday lunch, and help me plan curriculum. Which is like it serves a certain demographic of students, like, and acknowledge that entirely. But it's also nice to be able to say, like, your peers thought that, like, planned this, or your peers created this act, whatever. And that I think sort of increases students' like ownership and sense of like why things matter in class. It's like if it came from their peers, it's more important than if it comes from me. But even like today, just something really simple I was thinking about was like, I just said to the class, I was like, look, we're going to do a new unit in a couple of weeks. I'm debating, like, should we do book clubs or should we do another class read aloud? What do you want to do? Take a survey. And then like showed them the results. And I was like, cool, we're going to do book clubs. Like, that's what you told me you want to do. Let's do it. So just like really simple ways to get students' voices in, and like for them to see that their voice matters and that you're listening to them, you hear them, you see them, I think is really important. But one thing that I feel like I've been doing really intentionally this year, it feels really important to me, is like naming extreme behavior. Like that's one thing I didn't talk about it in the first round, but like I think from our students who are not sort of able to come back to baseline, so we're seeing just a huge increase in like really extreme behavior. And I think my frustration in the past couple of years has been that there hasn't been an adequate response from our school system. And I think my thought around it is that it's because we're sort of desensitized to it right now. Like we've gone so long with like such a spike in behavior that we're like, oh, this is the new normal. And so when we have team meetings and we're bringing up student behavior, not being saying like, that's not normal. That's not something that like we can accept in our community. Like, that is sexual harassment, right? Like naming how extreme it is so that we can respond appropriately. Because I think a lot of the time people are like, just what so-and-so does. It's like, no, we cannot send that message. Like in order to have students feel like they belong and build community and have students feel like they can be themselves, and show up to school and like integrate into the learning community. They need to feel like they're not going to be sexually harassed at school, or right, like it seems like a no-brainer. And I think we've gone so long with such extreme behavior that we're like, it's just what it is. So being really intentional about like pushing back on that normalization of things that aren't normal. I don't know who hasn't gone yet.
Christy. Yep.
Thank you. Yeah, so much swirling around in my brain. Thinking a lot about relationships and relationship building. One of the things that came out at a team meeting I had with Burlington High School students last week or the week before was, we have a team, it's called the Youth and Family Engagement Team. And our goal is to have youth as well as like parents and caregivers, and then bring in, with each new retreat, like bring in new folks and have like circle dialogue. So like parents coming in and then administrators coming in and then teachers coming in, with the youth having created the questions for them to like sit in circle. And they were talking about, high schools were talking about how like when they were in elementary school, they felt like their parents were so much more involved. You know, they were communicated with all the time. There was like community dinners. There was like a harvest festival, you know, like there was just like more community touch points. And then as they get older, that becomes less and less. And one of the students said, yeah, like, I feel like my parents won't even like come to the school until graduation. Like, they're just not like, they have no connection with the school. So yeah, just thinking about that as students get older, not letting go of that, those touch points that seem to happen a lot in elementary school. And I think, yeah, someone mentioned like student voice and listening to what they're experiencing and saying. And the adult partner that was with us from Edmonds today was said at the end, we kind of did like a debrief reflection, and he said it was so great to hear, you know, your perspectives. I often don't hear from several of you, you know, who don't share these thoughts during the school day, but like you came here and you shared your perspective on things, and that was so important to hear. And we did a ton today of like, it's so fresh in my mind. So we did like a ton of community building activities. Like we had like a Play-Doh Pictionary competition, and we played Where the Wind Blows. You know, we did a lot of just like fun, low stakes community building. And I think kind of integrating that as much as possible into the school day when you can, you know, to build those communities. I was listening, there was a podcast on, forgetting who was interviewing her, but Adrienne Marie Brown, who I just love, the writer and thinker. And she said, relationships are going to save us. She said, that is like, as we head into this really volatile year of, you know, the election and everything, everything going on in the world, but like, we have to start with relationships or we're not going to get anywhere. And that just really stuck with me as kind of like the theme I want to carry into this year. Yeah, so that was a big, a lot of swirling thoughts, but that's what I was thinking about.
Thank you all for all those ideas and thoughts. And just a couple of them I really like. I think Meg talked about the idea of routines and being predictable. And for me, that's included making sure to tell kids what's on the horizon. Like, this is what we're doing today, this is what we're doing tomorrow, and here's why. So that kids have an idea. They'll still come into class and say, what are we doing today? But at least for me, it's kind of setting the stage, especially if you have some of the, you know, a little bit more strenuous challenges ahead. Hey, this is what we're doing now, but be aware this is happening. The other thing, I'm really thinking about my language now. And one of the things that I always try and say is, hey, we don't, you know, if I want to correct behavior, I might say, hey, we don't do that here, right? Like it's we, and it's bringing it all together, but making sure to use really positive language with kids. I'm really trying to emphasize that. And especially somebody talked about naming behaviors, but I said to one kid the other day, I said, you know, you're going to have to use a little bit different set of tools, but you're a problem solver, and I think you can handle that. You know, just kind of talking kids up all the time and using really positive language. And then the other piece too that I just kind of want to focus on is I'm doing a lot of project-based learning and integrated literacy. And I know that it doesn't feel like integrated stuff is really the what's on the menu these days, but like integrating your literacy and having kids real world audiences. So, okay, we're going to write thank you letters and it's going out into the public. So we need to make sure that it's appropriate. And then the other piece too is I'm thinking a lot about flexible pathways. And we used to really think about how are we getting our middle school students ready for flexible pathway opportunities. And for me, that includes having guest speakers come in. We're starting to have more guest speakers come in. And I just feel like kids respond, when there's different adults around, they're hearing from different adults. I think that's a really good example for those kids. And then including questions, when those adults come in, like, hey, how'd you get into this position? What kind of education did you have? What were some of your formative experiences? So that kids can see, I may have opportunities now that could kind of push me in one direction or the other. And just maybe I should have my radar out looking for those opportunities. And then the last piece is, this is my, I think, third year doing what I'm doing, and I'm teaching 5th through 8th. So I only get to see kids for a quarter, but the ability to call, to walk into almost any room in the building and call a kid by their name, 5th grader, 8th grader, that is reaping huge benefits for me. It's just because I get to see them in the hallway. Hey, what's going on? And I just feel like that's been really important, especially over, a long period of time. So you can see them grow and you can, be part of that development. So that's also something I'm thinking about is those relationships. And Joe talked about being out in the hallway and just having conversations with kids, remembering their birthdays, just a little stuff like that, I think is really important. So before there's one quick last question I have, but before we do that, Meg, you had indicated, do you want to talk a little bit about family? Because you had mentioned a little bit about that, and I want to make sure you get a chance to talk about that.
Yes, absolutely. So the family conference is a student-led conference that happens in March, and I just want to make sure I get the date right. But the conference is on Tuesday, March 12th at Champlain College. And if you and your school are thinking about sending a group of students, it's typically about five students per adult, with a max of about 20 students. And this is just such an incredible opportunity because it is student workshops run by students for students. And it's really about how to go about changing the culture at your school. So we have about 12 to 14 workshops. There's an AM and a PM one. Lunch is served. It's at the beautiful campus of Champlain College. And it's just such an empowering day. And if you are on the fence, or if you know of schools that might be interested, or you want to share the costs with other colleagues in your building or in your district, just be great to have you there. We really love that part of being on the family board. It's a real boost for us, and just to see the youth often coming back to the conference to present what they learned from years before. So it's definitely worth it. Yes. Yeah. It's great. It's great. Thank you.
So that's March 12th, the family conference. And then the Saturday before that actually is the middle grades conference, which is happening at UVM. And if you want to get together, reconnect with educators, it is, it's a Saturday. It's after most of our breaks. And it's a really great way to kind of reconnect and see the great work that middle level educators are doing, especially those who attended the Institute and then are coming back, and just reconnecting at that time of year always feels good. So again, March 9th is the middle grades conference. March 12th is family. And Meg, I'll be taking a group of kids up there and presenting. So that'll be good. The last question
Awesome.
that I have,
Thank you.
it's a quick one. It doesn't feel quite like the New Year's was just a few short weeks ago, right? And everybody makes these goals and their hopes for 2024. But I'm just gonna ask folks to say, like, what's one goal or hope you have for 2024? And we're gonna do the same thing. I'll start and then I'll pass it along, and then we'll be done for today. I also, just before I do that, I just want to remind folks that our next conversation is on February 18th, a month from now. And I want to make sure that I let you know how much I appreciate all the work that you're doing with students, all the work that you're doing to raise up kids. And look at that little fellow right there. The house is still in one piece. It sounded like he was working on the deconstruction there a little bit, but good to see him. And I guess, you know, one hope that I have for this year is that I guess it's that, you know, through supporting students and setting a positive example, that we can also support our colleagues kind of in a way. I'm feeling like teachers are really struggling right now, and it's really grindy time of year, but I also feel like there's a lot of young teachers, even veteran teachers, who are under pressure right now. And I guess my hope is that we can bring some of that joy and bring some of that fun back into learning, because that's what makes middle school a great place to be. And so that's one of my goals for this year, is to figure out how to bring more of that fun and engagement back to the classroom, and maybe help other teachers do that as well. Kevin's got his hands full, but I'm gonna go to him so that if anything comes up, he can be done. Kevin?
Thanks. Yeah, so just a general, a personal goal I have is trying to sleep a little more. But Don, I love yours too, just like that concept of joy and just making sure. I love Alex Bennett's point about that unconditional positive regard, and making sure I approach every day with that in mind, and finding ways to connect with every single student, and making sure they feel valued and loved. So that's a big goal I have. Thanks. I'll pass it over.
Oh, you're on mute, Kev.
Sorry, did I freeze? I'll pass it to Katie.
All right, we got you that time. So yeah, my goal is to just not rush through my entire life. I don't want to rush my life away, just going from thing to thing, to-do list to to-do list. So trying to stay in the present moment with what's happening is important for me. And slow down when I need to slow down, and be intentional, simplify, those kind of themes we've been talking about this whole session. So Meg, what about you?
Thanks, Katie. I wrote down to listen first. Like I really think I think I'm a good listener, but I think I need to listen first. And I also, sorry. Please call 102. And Allison Selmer, please call 102. Sorry about that. And I really want to think about the kids that are on the edges, and how do I listen really intently with them. Evie.
Mine comes from working with Rebecca Haslam, both in a professional capacity here at school and also as a graduate professor, one of my graduate professors at St. Mike's, that she's always talking about showing up with your values intact, making sure that I show up to school whole and like authentically myself, and letting students know where I stand on important issues, that like students should never walk into my room and wonder about whether I support them or not, or whether their identity is going to, change the way that I feel about them. So that's my always goal, but especially with this group right now. I'll pass it up to Joe.
Thanks. Acknowledging that there's a gap between who I am and who the young people are that I'm with every day, and then trying to bridge that gap. That's my goal, and to be open. Many things Evie just said. I would echo those. That's the point, is to try to find common ground and go in a positive direction. So those are my goals. And I'll pass it on to, I'm looking at the thing here, Christy.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, so much is resonating, and thinking about just staying present. Like this week, I was with Winooski Monday, Edmonds today, and then Colchester tomorrow. And sometimes in this particular job, it's like you create your agendas and you're like, okay, we're just going to do our agenda, but like really slowing down and like focusing on those relationships and not just kind of getting into like robot mode with the agendas, but like really observing and being present with each team that I'm with, and not just kind of like looking at the agenda and going for the next protocol that we're doing. I think gratitude too. I've been really trying to like every night write down 5 things that I'm grateful for that day. Like, and it doesn't have to be anything huge. It could just be like coffee, but just making a gratitude list before I go to bed, it just helps me kind of reframe the day and reframe my thinking about all that happens. So, yeah.
Thank you, everybody. So many good ideas right there. And I just really appreciate everybody's thoughtful contributions. I hope that January, the end of January here and the beginning of February go well for you. The days are starting to get longer. So that's always what I look for, because you can tell at the afternoons. I mean, there's just so much light on my way home. It's fantastic. So I hope all of you continue to do the good work. I appreciate it. I'll be in touch. And thanks again, and have a great evening, everybody. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you.